Sweet. All right, so other things, try to use the chat as much as possible. There's going to be a lot of people speaking in this event. I wonder why, like, sounds like a debate. But basically, like, try to respect the speakers. Use the chat for like questions or like thoughts. Feel free to like chime in on things if you want to, like comment on like any kinds of arguments that the speakers are making, but try for it not to be extremely disruptive, because it really gets distracting if people have notifications on and they see like things otherwise. Other things, mute yourself if you can. Change like add your pronouns to your name in case you would like to do that, and basically just like enjoy the event, and like feel free to message any of the exec members or like other MDU members. I encourage like exec members to change their names and add their positions as well. So if you go to participants and see their entire full name, you'll see the McGill Debating Union's exec members like positions in some kind of abbreviated form at some point. Okay, sweet. So I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and I'm very cognizant of like, especially how this takes place this year, and maybe I can explain why a land acknowledgement is still important. We might not be physically on the McGill University. However, we still want to acknowledge that McGill, where much of our operations have taken place in the past and will continue to do so in some form of future, that all of us are together. It is situated on traditional and unceded territory of the Ganikahaga, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. So just to explain what unceded territory is, in case you already haven't come across this in any of your other like first year events, or if you're a McGill student, unceded territory is territory that was never surrendered or even committed to be shared, which is unlike other parts of Canada where treaties were signed with Indigenous communities. In many of these cases, a lot of these treaties were forced into, or they were defrauded in a way that they were not honored. So as an institutional like body, the McGill Debating Union also like to note that land acknowledgements are only the first step and a basic requirement to helping deconstruct colonialism and neocolonialism in the many forms that it exists today, which settlers and migrants like myself have equal responsibility in dismantling in our own individual capacities. So in case you have like other questions, you can always visit McGill's website on like equity resources, and it explains what land acknowledgements mean in a more detailed way. So I'm putting that in the chat. So like whenever I say there's a link, I'll probably put it in the chat. So please look in there. Just to kind of like come back to land acknowledgements, they help us provide some kind of like recognition to the land's history, the growing relationships with local Indigenous communities. And they also like expose a broader community to Indigenous history, which has long been suppressed in like what is today Canada and throughout the world. So essentially they're helping foster a welcoming environment for all of our Indigenous people on campus, and also is a call to action for individuals who can use their intersecting privileges to honor justice and resist oppression. So that's kind of like a preface. About the MDU, we're an organized public speaking and argumentation club. We focus primarily on British parliamentary debate as a format. It is the format in which the World University Debating Championship takes place. But we also do another style in the winter, which at this point is TBD in case you've already joined the group and know that there's a debate on whether there should be another format, but traditionally it's always been Canadian parliamentary style in the winter. The difference between the two is the number of teams and some of the like other logistical stuff. Like for instance, in Canadian parliamentary, you can bring in your own motions or topics, versus British parliamentary, where a team of like adjudicators prior to the tournament decide the motions and topics for people to debate on that day. So we host practices on Mondays and Thursdays. On Mondays, we do show rounds like this one. So we invite some of our pros and even our like up and coming novices to debate and duke it out in a more public format. These are a lot more fun. You get to like meet people on a weekly basis and like see them debate. Right now, as it stands, we're going to have both practices on Mondays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. EST, but at some point we'll hold, like after this show round, we're going to have a interest form out so that folks who are in like, again, different time zones and like have other scheduling difficulties can, like, we can see if there's an interest for alternative practice timings. So on Thursdays, we also do like quick seminars. So your chair of debates is primarily the one who organizes that. They're the one who can, so there's Jacob, in case you see them. Jacob is our chair of debates. And they're responsible for curating and also presenting any kind of training material to the club for both Canadian parliamentary and British parliamentary formats. Okay, so what are we actually training for? What are practices for? We do tournaments, and tournaments are not, the only tournaments we go to are not world championships or high stakes tournaments. We do tournaments pretty much every weekend. Online tournaments have proliferated. The circuit or the Canadian or the different Venn diagrams of like regional kind of like the regional circles of debating people. So there might be like a Canadian circuit, and then there's an American one, and then there might be a whole global circuit where a set of events occur. But that has really kind of, the lines have really blurred so far, mostly because the access has improved due to reduced costs and basically no traveling, which is a huge advantage for a lot of people, but even for those who have had like internet problems, have been able to at least meaningfully participate in some kind of way. So there's something for everyone in online tournaments. They happen on weekends, 99% of the time. We have a calendar for tournaments, which I will post at like in the end. I will post like an entire list of links for you. So you can add this calendar, it's a Google Calendar link. You can add this to your own, or we post a calendar for every month in our listserv, which I'll also talk about. So a lot of these tournaments are paid. Currently with online tournaments, like I said, the cost has reduced significantly. A lot of them range between $10 to, let's say, $50 at the most. So we also have a bursary available. We can like fully waive off the registration fees in case you want to. This bursary form is like recurring. You don't have to kind of like wait for an application deadline or something. For tournaments, you bid to tournament. It's a fancy way of saying that you kind of apply to be on a tournament but for, again, online tournaments, it looks very different this year. You can individually apply to these things versus having to go through the MDU. So we'll let you know which tournaments are the ones that you have to apply to the MDU. And then there's a tournament selection committee that will select people based mostly on commitment and your like kind of like your debate goals and how we see it can help you. Okay, so I hope that pretty much covers like preliminary questions. We'll have like space in the questions for end. I'm just gonna invite the exec super quick if everybody's here. I forgot to mention this, but my name is Sujneet, and I'm the president. I use she, they pronouns, and currently, so I'm a third-year honors history student doing social studies in medicine as a minor. I like debate, apparently, and I also do biking, so that's kind of about me. You can recognize me as like the person who like recently joined the subset of like short women with short hair, and you like add me on Facebook. if you want to. So I'm just going to invite like other exec members to kind of like quickly introduce themselves. Ben is the vice president.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ben. I use he, they pronouns. I'm the vice president. I am a second year double majoring in history and art history. So if you guys ever want to talk about art, come to me and we'll have really nerdy conversations about that. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome, sweet. We don't have our treasurer here today, but Zach, Ben, Samana, you can find everybody on the group if you want to like do a quick stock/search. They're going to be handling all things finance, and the bursary forms are read only by the treasurer and myself, so they're completely anonymous. Trade secret of bursary forms is like we accept everybody, so there's really no explanation needed as to why you're applying. Anyway, we invite the chair of debates, Jacob.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob. I'm a fourth year computer engineering student. I've been debating since since high school, actually. And yeah, I'm taking first year biology classes this year. So maybe I'll be in classes with some like first years as well. But if you want to talk to me about computer science, let me know.
Lit. We have our equity officer, Maya. And
Sup, I'm Maya. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the equity officer, so I handle things that relate to like accessibility and ensuring that everything that MDU does is done in an equitable way, which means that it's fair and accessible. So if any of you ever have any issues, I'm the person you should talk to. Or you can just talk to me if you're lonely, because I'm also lonely and I need friends. So feel free to message me at any time about anything. I'm a history student, by the way.
Awesome. Karen is the external tournaments coordinator.
Hi, I'm a second year joint honors in political science and philosophy with a minor in social entrepreneurship. Yeah, I'm the ETC, so feel free to reach out. Same like deal with Maya. If you ever like need someone to talk to, obviously you can come talk to me. Yeah.
Sweet. So Karen is the one who you can go to regarding all kinds of like what tournament's happening, like how do I sign up for it? They would know everything about it. Awesome. And chair of publicity, we have Huang.
Hi, I'm here. I'm Huang. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the chair of pub. I'm in my third year, double majoring in political science and sociology. So any questions about Max Weber, I can regretfully answer them all, hopefully. And yeah, if you see any of our Instagram posts or have our mailing listserv, that's me. And yeah, if you have any questions, just DM me on Instagram.
Nice, thanks. So they're also the person to like manage the listserv, all kind of promo, would also know a lot of details on a lot of things. Everybody would, for the most part. Okay, so chair of exhibition debates, we have Abdullah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abdullah. I prefer he, they pronouns. I'm a U2 honors in political science with a minor in international development. So if you want to talk about politics or like tweets that Trump makes, or like in general, just basic things such as like exploring Montreal with food because I like traveling a lot, or just talking about cricket hype, football hype, the international football, not the American one. Yeah, you can definitely reach out to me on Facebook.
Awesome, Liddy. I'm gonna invite chair fundraising, but they aren't here today. Their name is Beatty. Oh, you're here. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Yep, I'm Beatty. You can use any pronouns. I'm a second year philosophy student, and you can also talk to me at any time because I also like to talk to people.
Awesome, sweet. So Beatty also like organizes fundraising events. So if you have like ideas or thoughts, you can always like reach out to them. Okay, last but not least, I really hope Stanley is here, but they are the socials director. Sorry, I know we have Asha, don't worry about it. I have it on the list. Sorry, Ashia. Okay, Stanley.
Oh yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm third year philosophy student. I'm the social director, so I'll be hosting social throughout the years. And yeah, please come to social. They'll hopefully be fun. And also, if you have any suggestions regarding like what you want to have or like what you want to do on a social, just like let me know. Message me on Facebook. I'm also down to like play Minecraft or like I know I'm very bored now, so yeah, let me know.
Sweet. After pressing F in the chat, please invite Ashia.
Hello, I am the forgotten member of the MDU exec team. My name is Ashia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the internal tournaments coordinator for the MDU. So any kind of like practice tournaments we have, any of the tournaments we host for QSID, which is the wider Canadian debate circuit, I sort of supervise that kind of thing. So if you want to ever talk about like things like novice tournaments that we host or like any of the like stuff that we're hosting soon, like which you will find out about soon, things like Central Novice and stuff, you can talk to me about them. As everyone else said, I talk all the time and I can talk about anything. If you want someone to talk to, I'm your gal, come say hi.
Okay, thank you everybody. So basically TLDR for exec members is that you can talk to anybody. They're here to support you and hear you. So any issues, it doesn't matter like what portfolio you go to, they would be definitely able to like either redirect you to the right person or solve your problem there and then. So feel free to like reach out to any of the exec members. We also have like older members of the club who are known as pros. And then we have our first years or students who are joining debate for the first time known as novices. You can reach out to any of the pros in case you have questions. Later on in October, we'll be hosting elections for a member at large who is a novice. They'd be able to like represent novice interests and also kind of promote events in that like new sphere because everybody's kind of new and like folks are still learning. So yeah, that's basically it. Other like general things about how we run and where you can find information. The primary way to get like info re the MDU is on the Facebook group in case you already haven't joined. Put the link in the chat. Here we post like everything from practice timings to like new events, socials, etc. We also send them out in the listserv. They go every Tuesday. So for like more immediate info, you get it on the group. So make sure you join. We also have a novice group that is just like a novice group for everybody. So in case you were a member in case you were a novice last year in the group and didn't attend as many tournaments, you can still stay in the group and see like novice specific things. So this is the novice group. I'm just gonna add nav group. Okay, so join these two groups, super important. Other things about our upcoming event. The next event after opening of the house is Novice Trainings. It happens on 2 dates, the 14th Monday and the 17th Thursday, both at 6 p.m. On Zoom. They have event pages, and this is an opportunity for everyone to like get reacquainted to like what it means to be in the MDU, what you can do, like, and also we'll have like a practice round and seminar of sorts to teach you British parliamentary style debate this semester based on your existing experience. So you'll be divided into groups based on that different forms of experience. So there might be people who have done like other forms of debate before but haven't done BP. There might be others who have done BP their entire high school life, and others like myself who started with like no BP experience at all. So that's how it's gonna go. I'll put I have the event link for NOV training as well. So, whoops. Oh, somebody just messaged me.
Okay. Well, people are like looking at those links and signing up. I'm just going to introduce the topic that we're going to be debating. So the style of debate that we're doing today is called Canadian Parliamentary. It's not super important, but we're going to have 2 different teams of 2 people each. Just like any debate, I don't know if, I assume some of you have seen debate before, but for those that haven't, the way this works is that the teams are randomly assigned one side of the topic. So they don't choose what they're defending, and they're given a motion that they either support and explain why it's true and something that should be like done, or that they oppose, essentially negating what the other team is saying. There are a lot of names for these teams, but in this format, we call the team that is in favor of the motion the government team, and the team that is against the motion the opposition team. The reason for that is not super important. So the motion we're debating today is this House prefers a world where the majority of people believe in free will as opposed to one where most people believe in determinism. So some definitions here. Free will argues that people are able to make autonomous choices throughout their lives. For the purpose of this debate, free will is recognized to be constrained by some more obvious limitations in people's lives, so like economic status, but it's still considered to be uninhibited within those basic constraints. In contrast, determinism argues that everything that happens in life is completely determined by like everything that has happened before. So your biology, environmental factors, nature and nurture, that sort of thing. So those are the two contrasting sides. The one thing we'll point out is that the motion is not which one is true, but which is better for the majority of people to believe. So it could be that one is like a useful myth, for example. So the government team that supports believing in free will is team Small But Feisty. So I'm gonna have them introduce themselves first.
Hi, is my mic working?
Yeah.
Yeah. My name's Naomi. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a second year at McGill, and I'm majoring in political science.
Hi, I'm Ruth. I also use she, her pronouns. I'm in my fourth year. I study computer science. I also do a minor in political science. I'm graduating in December. So sad. But I'm really happy to meet all of you.
All right. And on opposition, we have team Destiny's Children. So we'll have them introduce themselves.
Hi. I think people can hear me. I have the yellow square. My name is Micaela, or Mick. My pronouns are she or they. I am a fifth year at McGill because I'm old, and my major is biology, minors in natural history and anthro. Talk to me if you want to hear about natural history. There's like 10 people in the program. It's great. And yeah, I'm excited to debate today.
Hello, I'm Abdullah again. My pronouns are he, they. I'm doing honors in political science with a minor in IDS that hasn't changed in the past 10 minutes. And I am entering U2, so yeah.
Brilliant. So the one thing I'll note before we start the round is we have an official judge and panelist who's Maya. They're going to be giving an RFD on the round after based on someone that has like a lot of experience. But after the debate is over, anyone that's here is going to have the opportunity to give floor speeches based on what they agree with or disagree with that people said, maybe their opinion on the motion. And we're going to have a vote from the audience to see who won. So pay attention, think about things that you would want to bring up if you were debating in this motion, and you'll have an opportunity to speak. So without any further ado, I'll ask Maya to introduce the speakers and start this debate.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Maya, can you just give me a quick minute for like quick reminders for people? One is like you can stay after the round for questions and answers. We might just like hang around to like know folks better as well, but that's not completely necessary. And we're also going to be talking about the upcoming novice only tournament, Central Novice. We have the TDs here, Kieran and Julian. They're both, so McGill's hosting this tournament on September 21 to 23. Do attend, like it's a good opportunity to like meet other novices from across Canada as well. And it will be all online. And at some point the bid form is going to be sent in the email or posted in the Facebook group. But we'll allow for questions on that after, and you can ask the TDs directly. Okay, Maya, back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, once again, hello, my name is Maya. I use they, them pronouns. What I'm going to do right now is what is usually done before like any university debate round. I'm going to say my pronouns, but that's not required of like speakers in the round. It's something that I like to do, but isn't like a necessity. I use they, them pronouns. I'll let my panelists introduce themselves. And then I will have each speaker in the round tell me their name, pronouns if they want to disclose, and like speaking position, which is who for each team is speaking first or second. So panelists and then Gov and then off.
Am I paneling or am I?
Yes. The people who are panelists are the people that I messaged, not at all
Excellent.
secretly.
Hi all, I'm paneling Reese, he or they pronouns are okay.
Yeah, I'm Stanley. I'm also paneling. No preference for my pronouns.
So Gov?
Speaking first on Gov is Naomi. I use she or they pronouns.
Speaking second, Ruth, she, her.
Speaking first on op, Mick, she or they.
Speaking second on op, Abdullah, he or they.
Okay, great. I want to do a reminder before the round starts that while I encourage participants to maybe like a message in the chat, don't like unmute yourselves and interrupt the round. Likewise, I'm going to ask all the speakers for like when you give people POIs, which is when you question people, say before your speech starts if you want people to message them or like raise their hand or whatever, just to avoid any confusion. Also keep your own time. Without further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister.
Okay, great. In terms of POIs, you can just say POI verbally, provided that you don't badger repeatedly. And I'll also be doing the 7-minute rather than the 6-minute PM. Imagine living in a world where you believe that you are a puppet of the universe. Whenever I make a choice, it is not myself, but the predetermined atoms in my brain telling me what to do. It is impossible to ever feel control, hope, pride, or access meaning in my life when I'm merely a slave to randomness. And it is on this basis we are proud to support a status quo where people believe in free will. I'm not going to model because I think that Jacob did a very good job setting up the definitions of the round, but I'm going to be introducing 3 arguments. Firstly, why there is substantially more nihilism in a world where people believe in determinism. Secondly, why it leads to the reification of harmful social hierarchies. And then thirdly, why we get a better criminal justice system under our side of the house. Into the first claim, why is there substantially more nihilism when people believe in determinism? The crux of determinism, all of your actions are determined by things beyond your own control, which means that you will perceive all of your choices being constrained by either your circumstance, genetics, or some other random social institution. Op might try to argue that you can have the illusion of choice even if you know that rationally everything is predetermined, but this is unlikely to happen. The reason for this is that a society that believes in determinism is likely to reconstitute the way that individuals are socialized to perceive choice. That is, when you were in science class at school and you were talking about biology, the dominant narrative becomes people lack meaningful control over their choices because it is determined by a variety of arbitrary things. And because it is likely to be deeply ingrained in our social consciousness of how we perceive choice, when we are making decisions, and it's unlikely that we're going to be able to enter into a state of cognitive dissonance where we believe that we truly are free. Even if maybe for the most micro decisions, i.e. whether I want to have Cheerios or Rice Krispies for breakfast, I will feel like those choices are free. Whenever I make major decisions in my life, there's always going to be a nagging doubt at the back of my mind whether I really am making that choice or whether something in the universe is compelling me to do that thing. This is likely to lead to nihilism for a couple reasons. Firstly, just a feeling of lacking control over your own fate and your own destiny. I'm not a separate person, but I'm a blob in the universe and my choices are determined by random atoms. But secondly, it is likely to lead to nihilism because you don't feel like you deserve any of the positive things that you've gotten in your life. Did I really get an A on my test because I studied hard, or was I just randomly designed to be more smart? So you feel very removed from your own accomplishments, which are often vital in inculcating a sense of purpose. Tangibly speaking, this will manifest in 2 negative impacts. Firstly, individuals are likely to experience mental duress on a daily basis, being in a cycle where you tell yourself that life is pointless because I'm unable to control things. That can lead to a kind of crippling sadness. Even though this sounds more trivial, this argument should be weighed highly because it has a massive impact on the psyche of billions of people around the world, especially on certain people who require a sense of hope, right? Perhaps people who are living in poverty who need to believe that they have the capacity to change their own circumstances. But secondly, this will also tangibly impact your own actions. When you think that your choices are predetermined, you're going to be less likely to try new things and potentially attempt to change the course of your life. So i.e., if you are suffering from addiction, you might be less inclined to get help because you perceive your addiction as being intrinsic to how your brain has been created, rather than your ability to break out of that cycle as being something that is within your own control. The second argument that we're going to advance is that belief in determinism will lead to the reification of harmful kinds of social hierarchies. The thesis of this claim is that social justice advocacy is likely to be far better off in a world where we believe that people have free will. This is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the notion that you have free will and that you're able to change your own circumstances is vital to the narrative that social justice movements use to forward their own advocacy. The belief that you should protest because things are able to get better, that you should stop polluting the environment because you can change the trajectory of climate change. We should organize into labor movements because you have the capacity to change your own circumstances. Under their side of the house, individuals are far more likely to fall into the thought pattern that bad things are bad and they're going to continually be bad. And this is the most rational thought process, because in a world where determinism exists, the most rational way that you can assess what the future trajectory of society is the most likely to look like is based on historical trajectory, because you're more likely to follow in those particular kinds of patterns. So this will have a chilling effect over valuable kinds of advocacy. But secondly, though, harmful social hierarchies are likely to be enshrined in a world where we believe in determinism. These are hierarchies that exist on the basis of gender, on the basis of race, and things like that. Under the status quo, people tend to believe that they reach the top of social hierarchies on the basis of meritocracy. Because you have free will, you work hard, and therefore you deserve what you earn. There are a host of problems with this narrative, and we're not going to deny that. But the valuable thing about a narrative based around meritocracy is that it is possible that we can critique that under a paradigm of free will. We can say that meritocracy is flawed because not everyone starts on a level playing field, that some people are born into communities that have structural disadvantage, which is why we have been able to push for policies like affirmative action under the status quo. Now, when you can no longer justify hierarchies on the basis of hard work, the most rational way that you're going to do that is that fate chose you to be at the top of that hierarchy. There is something unique about your moral status as a man or as a white person where you deserve to be at the top of that social hierarchy. And given the historical influence of religion in particular, which is probably going to be even stronger in a world where we believe in determinism because God is planning everything that's happening and people lack free will, the narrative is going to be God put us at the top of that hierarchy. And unlike meritocracy, which has logical flaws, it's very difficult to critique claims that are exclusively based on morality, right? You can't refute the idea that God bestowed someone with a unique kind of moral value that places them on the top of that hierarchy, meaning that things like feminism and BLM that dismantle these kinds of hierarchies are going to be a lot more difficult. On the comparative, we have seen the advancement of social change, right? Free will, we can still critique that. We can say that some people have choices that are more limited, which is why we can push for things like social policies that target poverty. Final claim. Why is a criminal justice system likely to be substantially better in a world where we believe in free will? There are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, rehabilitation is going to be substantially better. In a world where you buy into determinism, you begin to see criminality as something that is inextricably linked to someone's consciousness and to someone's self, that you are predetermined to have an evil mindset, and therefore there's very little that we as a society can do for you. As a consequence, your response is going to be an overly punitive one. If we can't make this person to be not a criminal anymore, we should just lock them up for the remainder of their life. Under a narrative of free will, though, this is different, because we believe that individuals are capable of changing, and you can change someone's arbitrary DNA. It's valuable to invest in rehabilitative resources because you're not doomed forever to be a criminal, which is actively good because we get a less punitive justice system, which disproportionately impacts certain people, and we actually provide the resources for people to get better outcomes. But secondly, we're likely to get more lenient punishments based on circumstance under our side of the house. Under the status quo, there's been a massive push for things like the mitigatory sentence requirements based on backgrounds under the narrative that moral culpability is different. If you're born into a poor community, you might be less morally culpable. Their side of the house says no one is morally culpable, right? And therefore you can get distinguishments on the basis of relevant differences in moral culpability. You're more likely to just lock away everyone for longer periods of time. Even less privileged people have more control over hierarchies. For all of these reasons, I'm very proud to stand on side government.
I thank that speaker for those remarks, and I call upon the leader of the opposition to open up the op side.
Okay, everybody can hear me? Cool. Oh, also for POIs, you can say something. Again, this is only for people debating in the round. If you're not debating, please don't interrupt my speech. But if you are debating, you can be like point, but don't badger me. And yeah, I think it's all okay. One of the biggest burdens on people today is the irrational clouding of decision-making and self-perception by the inability to recognize power of predisposition and circumstance. We're going to prove why this is the case with framing, and then 2 arguments about society and the individual, then any refutation that isn't implicit. So first, let's talk about the frame, because I think that their claims about being unable to feel agency are kind of false. Why? Because there's an information limitation on most choices, right? So I might choose to study something because I like it, but it may be hard to identify exactly why I like that thing because of a complexity of factors and the inability to determine each one's degree of influence or scope. So even though technically under determinism, I can know that things are beyond my control, that doesn't materially enter into the way that I think about things unless those factors are identifiable. And we recognize that some cases that is true, in which case, sure, your agency might be limited, but it's not as dramatic as Gov says, which is important because their claims are kind of hung on this idea that like everyone is going to feel paralyzed by determinism. So first now an argument on policy shifts and social change, then on mental health and self-perception. So policy shifts. I think that you're more likely to critique systems that marginalize for people for factors outside of their control. Like, I actually think the criminal justice system is a win for our side because the biggest barrier to fair criminal justice is retribution, right? Is people's desire to get back at people. And some of that happens because people are angry, but most of it is because you can justify the moral culpability or blame of that person. Otherwise, it's much more easy to advocate for the fact that these are cruel and unusual punishments. And listen, I think that their conception of like, oh, well, no one can ever be changed and rehabilitated is a little bit uncharitable. Like, I think people can point to the fact that someone had no education at a young age, and that was probably the deterministic factor that led them to failing, right? These are the types of things that people are more easily able to grasp than some obscure conception of like their genetic code, right? So I think that probably there's still some will to rehabilitate them, but at the very least, you don't get the worst forms of the justice system, which is retribution. They may say that these systems are tactically used with the idea of free will being used to oppress other people, but while this is true to an extent, it requires the oppressors using a narrative of free choice to maintain a state of false consciousness within the majority, right? Who, and we think in many cases, would be sympathetic and are sympathetic to the idea that certain punishments are unjust or certain factors are outside of people's control. I would point you to the evidence that in the US prison system, activist groups brought to light that ALEC, a pro-prison labor lobbying group, was lobbying for these types of policies, and a public campaign was almost able to dissolve this group entirely and shift policy. So we think that this is possible as long as people no longer see this idea of retribution as the only value in the justice system. And I think there's also very clear arguments against this idea of like locking people up forever, right? Notably, this is like super cruel and unusual, even if someone can't control the situation that they're in. The reason that that is justified when it's cruel and unusual is because of moral culpability, right? Moral things justify moral harms, and that's what they miss in their case. I also think that you're more likely to value equality of outcome over equality of opportunity. This is really important because people who are less successful in traditional jobs because of subtle factors like they're always late because they have to care for an ailing family member, or they're unable to focus for hours on end, they're now more easily justified as not being to blame for their own suffering. And this actually warrants the state stepping in because once again, it seems morally unjustifiable to leave people in a situation out of their control that involves suffering. I think that you're more likely also to target the root of the problem in cases where you get political will, because this looks like improving lower levels of education so that students from low-income communities get into university and then actually succeed, as opposed to just having something like affirmative action that benefits the most privileged people who got a good education earlier on, right? So I think that you get the best policy when you actually do have capacity to change things. That does, to an extent, exist on both sides. I also want to point out the efficacy here, right? Because people are sympathetic because they themselves see themselves as already being insecure about feeling guilty for things that they've done or failing to do things, right? So maybe we don't overthrow the American dream narrative, but I think most people benefit from taxing the rich and understand this idea of not being to blame for your own flaws, which they can extend to people who, for example, are like poorer than they are. Even if these impacts don't flow to the ballot box, though, we're going to prove why you treat other people and yourself better on mental health and perception. So even if nothing else happens, I think people are more forgiving to themselves because they will be able to sometimes, not always we recognize that their mistakes are not something that's an intrinsic failure of a sense of self, but a failure of material factors beyond their control. Why is this the most important harm that happens? Because I think that marginalized people are those who have disproportionate emphasis placed on their failures by others and then sometimes by themselves as a kind of extension of that. So we're balancing the scales on the most vulnerable people, not yet, who experience the worst forms of suffering. And I think that this type of self-suffering is probably the most important thing because it's the frame of reference through which you see the world. And sure, maybe in their world, you're able to like recognize some achievements a bit more, but some people are structurally locked out of more achievement, right? They don't achieve big things in life. Some people just don't accomplish much in general because they're like depressed for their whole, not that everyone who's depressed does that, but like a lot of people have some varied degrees of not being able to accomplish all the things that they want. We prefer that these people don't experience the most amount of suffering that they would get in their world. I'll take Ruth now.
Okay, so a belief in free will is one where people can make choices, but those choices are still constrained by the circumstances you live in. So all those thing you say about how we need to give people better education or give people money so they can make more choices still exist on our side. We still get all those benefits you just listed.
No. Okay, so while it's fair for them to say that, like, in the status quo, people think that a poor person can't, like, pursuit of happiness their way to the, like, you know, being a CEO, I think that there still is pressure to say that if you're low income, you could, like, get a college degree and at least to some extent, like, pull your family out of poverty. That is still within this round. How do people treat each other, though? Because I think that this also matters. Well, first of all, I think people themselves are more likely to, like, see a therapist or advocate for themselves for accommodations and things like that when they see themselves as not being to blame for these things. But I think people are less likely to tell other people to get over it, because external ableism and mistreatment comes from internalized ableism, where people see this binary between people who are severely mentally ill or who are normal and neurotypical, and they identify with neurotypicalness to kind of escape that stigma. But I think if they see this as something that is more of a spectrum than that it's influenced by past experiences and predisposition, they're more likely to accept that and less likely to marginalize other people, which again allows people's sense of self to be preserved, which is probably one of the most important impacts that impacts everyone in this round. On to their stuff about nihilism. I think that nihilism is not that bad, right? They needed to prove why it was the worst thing in this round. I think that in their most unreasonable definition of determinism, where, like, everyone believes that they have no power in the world, which I prove isn't going to happen because of the information gap, fine, maybe that happens, but I still don't think it's that bad. You can find happiness in other things like relationships. But I also think that if you can't change your circumstances, why is believing that you can change them a good thing? I would say that that is actually bad. You make yourself feel like shit. They say that you reinforce bad hierarchies, but religion actually is not based on determinism. And most people's belief in religion is quite choice-based. It's like God responds to the choices you make. You can go to heaven, hell, get reincarnated, etc. So I think you actually weaponize most people's beliefs to say that there isn't some kind of broader fate, even though a minority people might buy into this idea of fate. I think most people can see that there are barriers that influence beyond their control. They say that you can't rehabilitate people, but I think that you can meaningfully rehabilitate people within certain factors. Locking up people requires the moral ascription of culpability, which you don't get in our world. We're proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker for those remarks. Call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to further the case for SideGov.
Okay. So I actually think the real reason why OP wants to deny the existence of free will is because they want to reject the notion that they could have used their free will to win this debate. That being said, I'm going to start with some basic framing on why I think that, like, a lot of the material we get coming out of OP really fall under the context of the changes we can get under free will. And then I'm going to go into first a large argument about the clash on you as an individual level, and secondly on the types of social change that we get. Okay, so first in terms of some general framing of the round, because I think that OP doesn't quite understand how free will exists. Free will is not the idea that people can make choices and every choice possible is possible to you. Free will is rather the notion that people can make choices, but those choices are constrained by the circumstances under which they live. So every time that Micaela just told you that some people might be more inclined to commit a crime due to the circumstances under which they grew up in or due to having less education, those are all notions that we believe today under the status quo with a status quo belief in free will, which is that some people's choices were skewed by the circumstances under which they live in. So on our side, we can still give people more education because we have a belief in free will, and in order to nudge people in the right direction and to get them to make a better set of choices, we have to give them the circumstances under which they can make those successes. So I think given that, a lot of the material that they then have in their case kind of falls under this, right? Every time they talk to you about the fact that people need to recognize structural failures, you also recognize structural failures on our side of the house. This is why we have massive social justice movements, even under a world of free will, right? Because we're talking about the status quo, where we have a feminist movement to say that there is problems in the status quo that are structural in nature that constrain the choices that non-men are able to make. This is why we have a Black Lives Matter movement, because we recognize that there are choices constrained by people depending on the identity that they have, right? So all of that exists, but I think on our side, you recognize
that because you want people to be able to expand on the number of choices that they're able to make. I think the major flaw then with the op case is that they never tell you how, given that circumstances are flawed status quo, how they actually get any tangible change on their side, right? Even in their best case, in which you recognize that there's problems within the circumstances that people live in, and those problems are predetermined. I have no idea, given the speech we just heard, why when you notice those predetermined flaws, people are able to actually act on them and work towards getting change, as opposed to what Naomi already tells you in the PM speech, which is that maybe people at the top of social hierarchies will just asymmetrically weaponize those predetermined factors in their favor and say things are predetermined so that I can hold a lot of power, and this is just how things ought to be, and you never actually seek towards tangible change. Okay, what I want to talk about, I guess, first is on the individual level. So I think that largely speaking, ops responds to the entire point that we give you on nihilism and why people are no longer going to feel as if they have a lot of freedom within their life, and why people are no longer going to have as much hope is they can find happiness in other things like relationships, and that everything else doesn't matter because they can't change things, so they should just feel less bad about themselves. So a few responses to this, which I think was a pretty bad engagement with our argument. So the first thing I'd say is that every time they tell you you can find happiness in another thing, you actually can't, because under determinism, you are of the belief that that relationship you're in might have just been predetermined for you, right? That you happened to be born in a place and then you met another person and then you became friends with them, right? Every single thing is predetermined, and the only response that we get from op is this notion that, well, if you're unable to grapple with why it was determined that way, you actually will reject the notion and instead believe that maybe it was your own free will. But here's the problem with that. What we already tell you in PM is that people are going to be societally constructed to believe that those things are not free, right? They did not choose that relationship, but rather in their biology class, they're going to be taught that everything was because of their genetics that they were born with. In your history class, you're going to be taught that things are a factor out of your control that existed before you, and that affected the individual choices that you can make. So every time a success happens within your life, some of that happiness is stripped away just due to the nature of the fact that you didn't actively choose to get the tangible success, right? You were unable to make a choice to succeed in a class or steer yourself in the right direction, so you can't actually attribute maximum happiness to your side. So if you want people to get a feeling of gratification, you ought live under a paradigm of free will under which people are able to get the benefits of knowing that the things they did actually led to their own success. In terms of the notion that some people might not be able to change things, I actually just think that this is really dumb, because under the side of determinism, you live in a world where you all, I guess under their belief, you can't change things, but then you just live knowing that you can't change anything, right? If you're born into poverty, I guess op wants you to just be well, it was determined for me. But here's the thing, people are still going to feel bad about that, right? They're still going to see that other people were born in a position under which they have more economic advancement and are able to therefore maybe get perks that you don't, right? You're still going to feel bad about the circumstances you're living. On our side, the difference is, yes, you might feel bad temporarily, but you're able to have some hope that you can make choices to steer yourself into a better direction. You could look towards the trajectory in the past, and you could see that some people were able to rise to successes even despite where they were born into. And that's why people are able to have some hope and perseverance to feel better about themselves. So every single benefit about your personal happiness falls to our side. I think there's a pretty heavy impact in this debate, given how much people feeling bad about life and nihilistic thoughts are just a detriment to your every single day thought that you have. Okay, on social change. The first thing I guess I will talk about is the criminal justice system. So op tells you that you are under determinism, you're going to see that things such as people didn't have education as a factor that determined the crime that they committed, and so you're easier things rehabilitate people via giving them education. So in terms of that type of sentencing, the response that we have to this is firstly that it is under free will that you see that people made a bad choice because they lacked education, and so you change that choice by giving them back education and rehabilitating them. The problem is on op, it is very easy to skew the notion of determinism to say that maybe it wasn't actually your lack of education, but in fact it was because your genetic code was one of which you had evil genes and you were going to commit a crime, and that's why you were predetermined to do it, and therefore you don't actually get rehabilitation. And this in the best interest of some people at the top of power hierarchies to skew it that way, and that is why they're unable to get proper forms of rehabilitation. In terms of retribution, they say that we only get justice because of moral culpability. But here's the thing. Firstly, I don't actually think that having retribution is always bad. In fact, it is sometimes very impactful to victims to feel as if they are getting some form of meaningful retribution. But on our side, we could look at the extent of moral culpability that someone has, as opposed to saying they are an intrinsically bad person and all mass atrocities that happened or because they are like a deeply flawed person. On our side, we can look at the extent to which you are morally culpable, and that's why we are able to get lesser sentences, as we told you in PM. In terms of getting massive social structural change, under like free will, people are more able to do things like protest and have social justice movements because they feel like they're able to get a sense of change. That's how we're actually able to change structures that exist that determine the choices that you're able to make. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank that speaker for those remarks. Call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to further the case for
Hello, am I audible? Perfect. Give me 1 minute. Yeah, POIs in the chat, please. I'll try seeing them and recognizing them, but do not verbally interrupt. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, what we have to understand, the comparative in this debate is that getting told something is true, but not understanding it yourself doesn't necessarily mean you identify these factors, equaling to you not internalizing it, right? I'll start with some refutation to the DPM speech, and I'll build up with what Micaela said, right? Understand the things we get out of Ruth's speech. You get this idea that status quo might cause people to take choices in either side of the house, so it might not fall directly on determinism and we don't make it better. Sure, even if you do buy that characterization of it being a wash, we tell you it's much better on our side of the house, because now if you as a person recognize that you can't do certain things because of poverty or because of lack of education, you at least have other people who sympathize with you because now they recognize that you as a person structurally face these barriers. That is the mechanization Micaela tells you, is that this shift in paradigm that we get is now people don't associate things such as binary or 0 to 1, meaning you don't have one set of normal people, one set of people who are mentally ill, right, quote unquote. Now you have a people who look at the spectrum and sympathize with you much more better, simply because now these people themselves, regardless of hierarchy they are, understanding most people are in the middle socioeconomic hierarchy, are like, they realize that the mistakes they might have done themselves and they have embarrassed themselves are ones that caused by structural barriers they themselves have faced, meaning they sympathize with you as a person. So even if you can get through these barriers, you just get a more social movement on our side. But why should people actually act on such things, and why happiness is actually much better on our side of the house? Because we tell you that even if you don't get inherent happiness on our side of the house, the net neutral emotional stability that you get on our side of the house is significantly better than what you get on government side. Because the extreme characterization of nihilism that we get, I really don't understand why it's bad other than the extreme characterization of determinism, but then it doesn't deal with the idea of like you blaming yourself for the wrongs or for the failures that you have. Understand that people in the marginalized communities and minority groups have a bigger stake placed on them for their flaws as opposed to the successes they gain. They have just more liability on themselves. But if that's the case, even if you do fail to like stop giving yourself credit for the things that you have achieved, again, we believe that's just an extreme characterization. We tell you that you still earn the benefits and reap the benefits of getting such things. Meaning, if you get a merit scholarship or if you get into a university, you probably don't credit yourself too much, but you actually get the benefits of like getting education or getting a monetary refund. The improvement that you get on our side of the house is now if you fail, which you are probably tangibly more likely to do because of the structural barriers, you don't blame yourself. So we tell you that the net neutrality is much better on our side of the house. The other idea you get is like having people in poverty lines, like government characterizing how people in poverty lines do not try to go through these things, and then it's just much worse. I don't really understand why that is actually true, given that people have other things that shape their willingness, meaning day labor workers who only earn as much as they can spend behind food themselves still go out and do such things because they have the incentive of like feeding their family or like just carrying on their legacy. But then even if that's not the case, I literally don't understand why I personally have to be the meat shield to have the poverty agenda derail. Meaning, I personally don't want to be the one to actually push this whole thing around, and I'd rather have other people empathizing with me, which actually gets better on our side of the house. The other idea we get from like Naomi's speech is about social hierarchy. You get labor movement, right? The problem is that you have to understand, and it
ties into the retribution and criminal justice system is that while government characterizes determinism to something to be like having an evil gene, or like you deciding that you predetermined to be a criminal, the other aspect to this is with this predeterminism, it comes the idea about the factors that cause this predeterminism. Meaning, you as a population not only decide that it's been predetermined, but look at the factors that actually cause such an happening to even occur to begin with, right? When you start looking at like poverty, etc. Then how do we deal with such things on our side of the house, right? Because you have to contest and like deal with the comparative like equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. Two responses, two constructives that I'll agree with. The first idea of mental health, how you as a person give yourself and accommodate yourself more naturally. Because what you now do is you recognize your flaws and you stop blaming yourself, but more importantly, you have better interactions and more respect for people in your workplace in general, because you believe that people can go on and make mistakes that aren't necessarily weren't within their control. The impact of this, you're not only likely to see a therapist yourself, but more likely to advocate for like mental health rules that helps the more wider population. What this does is when you advocate for more wider population, it creates a social change that Gov tries to fight for, but it happens on our side with like policy shift. Sure, you might have more AA programs on their side of the house, but if we can prove to you, and we have proved to you, that people from like marginalized communities getting into the university through AA programs isn't the end deal, because now these people have to work 2 jobs or like fail classes because of the like lower institutional education harms that they have faced in their lives. We tell you that AA programs have like literally no impact to the extent that they want to prove to you. We tell you that these ideas that like oppressors have within you to have the conscious narrative, right? So the impact of this is we're more likely to target the problems at the root, get people to be more sympathetic, create a more social change. And even if you don't get the biggest impact of like ballot box, we actually get people around you to treat you better, to be more understanding, to respect you more. So proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker for those remarks. Call upon the leader of the opposition to close out off bench.
Okay, one sec. Oh, sorry, can you guys keep it down for just 1 sec while I speak? Sorry, I have friends in this house and I don't have a desk in my room. Okay. Note how pretty much all of Gov's case in this round is hung on a ridiculous perception of determinism, right? One in which like people perceive that just everything, including your relationships, is technically determined and that there's nothing you can change. We already pointed out why information gaps prevent that from being something that happens. We didn't get engagement. I think that our conception of free will is reasonable. We're not saying that like individuals are now going to stop seeing any kind of wealth inequality as legitimate in a way that they previously didn't. We're saying that there's some margin of change with regards to, for example, mental health, with regards to seeing someone who's like middle class as being able to lift themselves up to some extent. That is valid in this round and hasn't been engaged with. 2 themes on social change in the individual. First, on social change. I just want to respond to this fate thing, right? Because first of all, I think the religion response wasn't dealt with and that was pretty valid. But second of all, fate is less successful at resonating with people who are marginalized or working class, right? The comparative of having moral worth attached to fate is far more effective because that allows people to self-blame without like critically analyzing the fact that the system is gaming them. But I think that this is the same reason that like the great chain of being didn't stop feudal society from collapsing, right? Like people are not super, like I think most of the average people can at least see the flaws in that ideology as opposed to seeing the flaws in their own moral like responsibility. But they tell us that people get locked up in prison forever. I want to point out that this is largely the status quo, right? The pressure for like retribution means that this already happens. But I think that this is far easier to argue against when you can say that these people were not morally culpable for doing these things. So they should only be put in prison to the extent that it is useful. Notably, most people in prison are not actually dangerous. Like most drug dealers, for example, are not dangerous per se. And I think it's very easy then to argue that at least the vast majority of people who are currently in prisons don't deserve to be there. They tell us that people are going to see this in a very like technical sense, right? Because they're going to be taught it in school, but you don't internalize what you don't see in your life as like making sense to you. This is why people who are told that privilege exists but never experience like not having privilege in their lives don't relate to that and can't contextualize it or believe it very easily. So I think that their idea that you're just going to believe that everything is perfectly predetermined isn't realistic, and they didn't prove why it was. They say that you can't change your situation. I think Abdullah's response here about how the individual doesn't need to bear the burden of change is important, but also note the fact that they didn't prove why you can change your situation. If you cannot change your situation, sympathy, empathy is most important for you as an individual to not blame yourself. On the individual, they say that you get nihilism. This has never been impacted in this debate, and I don't think it's that important. I think that it feels far worse to have no escape from the failures of your life, but find happiness in some things. Like, for example, your relationships, which, by the way, like, you're not going to believe that they're worthless, even if they were predetermined, because you still feel love when someone hugs you, right? Or when someone listens to you. So that, I think, even if this is the only thing that happens in this round, because I do think that sides in this debate have struggled to prove that social change is impacted, then we should default to the fact that people who otherwise have their failures overemphasized by society, who often don't even see meaningful success in some cases, should at least be able to find escape and validation and advocacy from the worst forms of self-hatred. This is the biggest plague on people's existence. If we can eliminate that, I think we lead to some meaningful change for people. That's probably the biggest impact in this round. But I think they also needed to engage with the most reasonable conception of determinism and the information gap that came out of the top of my first speech. I'm proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker for those remarks. Call upon the Prime Minister to close out this round of debate.
I'm going to be discussing how we've won the two major clashes in this debate. Firstly, why we are better for individual emotional psyches, and then secondly, why we're better for galvanizing social change. On the question of emotional psyches, our case has been nihilism is bad. Op says, but the world is better, because you do not blame yourself for mistakes to the same extent. How are we able to deal with their argument? Firstly, we rejected their framing that those who are structurally oppressed often don't blame themselves. We don't think that people are stupid. When you are oppressed and you face microaggressions on a daily basis, you know that society is institutionally racist or sexist. So you are able to rationalize it is not me. There are social structures, especially with criticisms of the paradigm of free will that we have said can happen down our bench. But secondly, we were immediately able to wash out their argument by saying, even if people might blame themselves for failures more within our world, they're also unable to take credit for their own successes, which note that just immediately washes out this claim they cannot win on it. This matters because even if you are oppressed, there are still smaller successes that you can have in your life you can take a lot of joy from. Maybe you're advancing somewhat within the workforce, but there's also an easier psychological tendency not to blame ourselves for our failures, right? It makes us feel unhappy. We're not going to spend time thinking about that. More people can take joy in the valuable things that they are able to achieve. Even though if you buy that both things are equal, we would say that nihilism is far more impactful than not blaming yourself. This is because nihilism is something that is constant. Their world only impacts the individual psyche after you fail. They've tried to claim that nihilism is low impact, but that is false. It's every single day waking up feeling a sense of hopelessness because I'm unable to change my circumstances, feeling like I'm a rock in the universe, right? I think this is quite literally akin to like horrible depressive cycles. And we also explained how it did tangibly change your own behavior, because if you think that you cannot change your actions, you're less likely to make tangible choices in your own life. They never explained any kind of tangible impacts of like blaming yourself slightly more. Secondly, though, we were also able to win on the clash of how we were able to better society. On the question of dismantling hierarchies, they tried to say that they are better because you do not blame people as much for their own failures within society. Firstly, that claim fell because they never responded to the framing that was especially pushed in Ruth's speech about even in a paradigm of free will, we can still recognize structural problems. We can say that most people can make free choices, but poor people can make fewer free choices because they have less money. But secondly, this was unresponsive to the framing that we presented in Prime Minister, which is that believing that a meritocracy exists is the lesser of two evils of believing that people were allocated to social hierarchies on the basis of fate, that we have tangible evidence that we at least have some kind of affirmative action policies. But when you believe that God made you morally superior and that people who experience structural disenfranchisement deserve less, they give us no mechanism for how they can actually get social change under their side of a house. Even though if you believe that hierarchies were a wash, we explained how we got better criminal justice reform. They tried to say that overall the system becomes less retributive because you don't believe in moral responsibility to the same extent. We still have incentives to lock people up to make society safer overall. The comparative is you lock them up for longer periods of time because you think that they're incapable of rehabilitation, and you do not recognize the nuances of how moral culpability differs amongst different people. For all of these reasons, very proud to stand in government.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for a great round. Myself and the panel are going to go deliberate. Jacob, I don't know if you want to make us like a breakout room or if you'd rather we left the Zoom call.
I think leaving the Zoom call would probably be easier. But I can make a breakout room. I just think it might overcomplicate things. If you could just use like Hangouts or not Hangouts, Facebook Messenger and do that while we do. Thank you so much. All right, solid. So now that we've watched the debate, this is the time where we're going to start by gathering your collective thoughts. So we're going to, like at the end of all of our show rounds, we have an audience vote, and there are 3 options. You can either say that government won the round, so you think that their arguments were more persuasive, you think that people should believe in free will. You could say that opposition won the round, which means you think that people should believe in determinism in this case, based on the arguments that were presented in the round. Or you could vote for the moose, which means you didn't really think either team was winning, you're like kind of unconvinced, or you're like abstaining from voting. And the way we're going to do the vote is using Zoom's like React features. If you don't know how it works, it's really like not super important. But if everyone that thinks that government won the debate can sauce a thumbs up in the like reacts for Zoom, I'll count the votes now. Do people know how to do that? You go into participants, the more option, and then there's it's a thing people know how to do.
There's also the reactions button at the bottom. Next, like if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Nice. I'm seeing some. We'll give people like a 30 seconds to do that, and then we'll do a brief preliminary count. It's not super important. And in the meantime,
alternatively do raise hands because the reactions go away after like a few seconds.
Okay, yeah, let's do that instead then.
I'm also making a poll just in case, letting folks know.
Okay, yeah.
I can do
Let's just do, okay, I think poll will work comparatively better then.
Sweet, I'm just doing that. No worries.
Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna have a poll in your opinion. This is probably, normally it's good to have the poll before we go into floor speeches, because that way your mind is sort of not going to be influenced by things outside of the debate round. But just for the interest of time, we are going to have floor speeches now while the poll is being set up, just to make sure that we're not wasting everyone's time while we wait for technical things. So if anyone had things that they wanted to say about the round, either they give their opinion on the motion in a floor speech, or you like have refutation to something that you heard, meaning you want to explain why something someone said was maybe wrong in your opinion, then now is the chance. So just raise your hand and we'll go through and call on people that want to speak on this motion.
Or like ask questions.
Oh yeah. If anything was confusing, or even if you maybe you just want to know more about the club and it's unrelated to anything.
For debates in the future, is that speed and that amount of content sort of the norm? Are we supposed to speak that fast?
Okay, so there are 2 things that I would point out in this context. The first is that the debaters in this round had much more time to prepare than you would usually have, because we wanted to get the motion out to people. So normally you have 15 minutes to prepare your arguments, so you have a little less time. And so you're not going to be able to come up with as much information. The other thing is that these debaters have a lot of experience, and so they were able to give more content, because there's a lot of maybe they've debated this topic before and they know a lot about it, but there's no expectation that you would speak this fast at all. There are a lot of very good teams that will run fewer arguments. In our experience, most people that start debating for the first time don't usually fill up all of the time they have allocated for them, and then as you get better, you get more able to fill up all of your time. And we'll be trying to teach you how to do that, but it's absolutely not expected or anything like that. But usually at a more competitive level, this is somewhat representative. But the way tournaments tend to work, if you do compete, is that you're paired with people on a similar level to you. So you don't have to worry about competing with people that are extremely experienced. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Perfect.
I guess we can launch the poll in the meantime also, but folks can always unmute themselves. So it's an anonymous poll. Like Jacob said, 3 options. The moose if you're kind of unsure or iffy, or if you're just moose. Sweet.
Wait, can we vote?
Yes, we can, Abdullah.
Yeah.
You must
Yeah, everyone
actually.
can vote. Wow, this is spicy.
Every vote counts. There's a question in the chat.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is terrible. I'm pulling that up. Was the debate supposed to be about whether we'd prefer free will or determinism, or which is true? Because neither side really gave arguments for what's true. That's correct. So yeah, so the motion was, this house prefers a world in which most people believe in one thing or the other. So feasibly, you can prefer a world where people believe in a very useful myth, even if that thing is not in and of itself true. So I don't know, for example, like, I don't know, you could have a debate about whether or not like religion is like a good thing for people on net. And then the question would be based on that belief, regardless if it's true, maybe it means that people are like, you know, more ethical people, and that's a good thing regardless of the truth of that belief or not. And so a lot of debates will sort of be framed that way. Like there's a narrative, it's unclear if the narrative is true or not, but the question is this narrative or idea or belief beneficial to our behavior and the way we treat each other and stuff like that? Does that answer the question that was raised in the chat? Yeah, there are also debates about maybe whether or not it's true, but you know, perhaps they're just sort of different orthogonal topics. Brilliant. So yeah, and because it's kind of difficult to like see raised hands, if anyone wants to just like interject with thoughts or unmute yourself if you want to like begin, and I think it, you know, that would be totally welcomed. Or other questions about debating for the debating union, teams you thought did well, or just like people voted. So feasibly everyone that voted has some reason they voted the way they did.
I have a question.
Sure, absolutely. What's your question?
So my question is, what matters more? Is it the people's votes, or is it the judge's judgment?
That's a good question. So normally when we have show debates, the collective audience gets like one vote, and then each person on the panel gets one vote, because generally it's accepted that like the judges have substantially more experience and that's more legitimate. And at debate tournaments, it's exclusively judged by like judging panels. There are no like audiences except for like out rounds, like the finals of a tournament. And then it's just there's no like floor vote. It's just something that we do at our show rounds to get more audience engagement. So the vote doesn't really matter. None of this matters. There's actually no like, you know, if you win the round, like nothing good happens or bad. So I suppose it matters if the people debating feel that it matters to them personally and their own individual happiness. But as a club, we're not very competitive. So, you know, it's not, probably neither of those things matter at the end of the day.
That's a pretty
the one thing I would say.
But that's cool.
That? Sorry.
All right, thank you. That answered my
Yeah,
question.
no problem.
Awesome.
So one thing I would add is that generally the types of skills involved in persuading an audience are slightly different than convincing a debate judge. Generally, like judges are a little bit more technical. So the way tournaments tend to work is that there's no requirement for like eloquence or like sounding good. It's just about the like logic of the arguments you make, and people tend to stand back more than like random audience members might tend to. So there are a lot of cases where a team that sounds worse will end up winning because maybe their arguments, when you look at them like abstractly, were actually more like logically rigorous, or they proved more. And so part of like learning debate is also understanding how the debates are judged, and we'll be like teaching that at Novice Training and stuff like that. So you get an opportunity to learn how to judge, to panel with like experienced judges and learn about that process.
That's exactly why I asked that question. You hit the nail right on the head there. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right, so I think the polling results are out, correct? It looks like on a very narrow margin, Team government won the floor vote by 3 votes, so quite close. Congratulations to Team Government. Good stuff. So, anyone else? There were 43 people that voted. I feel like one of those people has to have a reason why they voted that way. I would also open this up to maybe like previous members of the club if you have thoughts. No? People voted randomly? Interesting.
Someone raised their hand.
Perhaps this...
Yeah, I
did?
raised my hand.
couldn't-
Can I? Can I share my thoughts?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Go ahead. I just didn't notice.
So yeah,
Sorry
personally, I
about that.
voted for a side opposition because I was more convinced about the argument on how believing in determinism would actually improve the outcome for people who are disadvantaged. Because like you often see people who are like those who are like less empathetic, they blame people themselves for their own choices, like, oh, he was lazy, he didn't study. But if we like take a step back and say that, okay, like the reason these people didn't study as hard or like committed a crime was because of, for example, their upbringing or like things that they didn't have control over, right? So if everyone believed that people were less responsible for their actions, then we'd be more empathetic to those who were worse off and we'd be more inclined to support them. That was just my personal take on it.
Interesting. Awesome. Do you want to let the Gov team respond to that briefly? Normally we have...
Sure.
Or actually, I guess
What
if
about like
things are
an
not...
audience member, maybe? We
Yeah,
could
does
respond
anyone
too,
disagree
but-
with that? Yeah, that's true. Sorry.
Yeah, I actually disagree. Could I give my statement?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I thought that government won the debate because even though both sides were really trying to blow up, like whether free, like a blown up version of free will or a blown up version of predeterminism, Op was good at describing how, people will not feel they're to blame for their situation or their problem. But I think that proposition showed that because of like the social hierarchies that would exist, it would be a lot more in the interest of the people that are higher up to keep them down. So instead of people feeling that I'm here for so-and-so reason, but I can get out of it, the people that are higher up will say, no, you're supposed to be there. And I think that proposition was really good at showing that how that would end up playing out. And they when they spoke about like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that and how, these institutions are there to break down the social hierarchies that exist, I can definitely see how that would, play out in a better world, like if free will existed, whereas if predeterminism existed, it'd be a lot harder to break down those hierarchies.
Awesome. Does anyone else have thoughts? Thank you so much.
Yeah, could I add something too?
Yeah, for sure.
Also, on the basis of the government claim, just kind of bouncing off of what Alex also said, I kind of really, like the whole idea really resonated with me with Gov weighing the difference between like social standing. Like for instance, like they kind of answered the question, okay, it's like you're privileged, that's great. You're not, it's too bad, like in this world of determinism. And they kind of like, they showed the dangers of this, whereas, the other side kind of argued a lot for sympathy and like empathy, like interpersonally between people instead, which was true, but I kind of like, I could understand the nihilism whole like narrative from Gov. And also like with the opposition side, they also kind of like talked about how the whole idea of people will be judged based on like their lateness or their inability to focus, whatnot, and these whole like failures that can happen with a person. But you can still like apply that to the free will concept as well, because people make these autonomous choices, but things happen beyond their control, and also people make choices for a reason too. So like things that happened in the past, for instance, like last time I traveled here, I took this bridge instead of that bridge, and I still have the free will now to kind of take the other bridge or whatnot. So, and this whole idea of like upbringing as well, like I still understand like, these upbringing still resonate like with the side government as well, because like people don't choose that. I don't know.
Yeah, That's really good. Oh, by the way, could you introduce yourself and like your program or something about you? I should have had everyone do that, but
Sure. So I'm U0 and I'm majoring in poli-sci and minoring in philosophy.
nice to meet you. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have thoughts on the round, contributions?
Alex raised
Like
their
disagree
hand.
with some? Oh yeah, Alex, did you have another thing to say? Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
I was just wondering about what compatibilism could potentially have to say about the debate, because at the very least, in my opinion, I think we're dealing with a false dichotomy. I think that in a way, free will and determinism can coexist. Why that is could be far more complicated, and I'm kind of abstract, so I don't really have the bandwidth to fully go into it, but I don't entirely think that they necessarily have to be in opposition. And I'm just curious about what people think about that.
Yeah, that's a very good like observation. I would point out one thing. So there are a lot of times where a debate topic will have two contrasting ideas that maybe aren't mutually exclusive, and then the sort of obligation of both teams is to take a more extreme stance where they try to show why maybe they should be mutually exclusive, why we shouldn't believe in a mutually exclusive version, because strategically, and this is what sort of separates debate from like a regular conversation where you try to, it's not really a truth finding activity, it's like a competitive game. If you make a case where you're like, we should believe both things, then it's unclear what side you're really like standing for. And so it's very easy for your like arguments that you're bringing forward not to do much towards your side of the house. And so people tend not to make those types of arguments, even if they might be true. But I guess since this is also a broader discussion, not just about debate, but free will in general, that's definitely true. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Or if you want to follow up? Also, sorry, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm U1. I transferred, and I'm hoping to study cultural studies and philosophy in a joint honors concentration.
Nice. Oh, I see Philip is raising their hand.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's a good point. Can tell it comes from a philosophy student. I'd like to build on it because, yeah, like a lot of some of the arguments that were used is that you can use determinism to justify a reality, which really, in my opinion, shows kind of a shallow understanding of what determinism is, because if you can change that reality, then you could also argue that that's determinism, that it was determined to change. So really, if you really argue for rule determinism, like proper determinism, like it's really too meta to make a point about anything. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Interesting. Did you want to introduce yourself, by the way? I only gave you a chance.
Sure. I'm Philip. I'm fresh out of CJEP, so I'm a U1 student, and I'm doing a joint honors in economics and finance.
Awesome.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I saw Kiana had their hand raised.
Yeah, in the same vein, I think that's one of the reasons I ended up siding with government, although I thought both sides made very interesting arguments, is because I felt at times opposition had a little bit more of a murky stance about how deterministic they wanted to be in the way people conceive of themselves, whereas I thought Gov had a very clearer stance of why like radical free will would be important. So I thought it was like a clearer thing to support and substantiate. And I'm in law school.
Nice. Other thoughts? Or questions about the club?
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm just like wondering. First? Oh, okay. So I'm Jennifer. I'm a U0 in management, and I'm living at New Res right now. So yeah, I'm just wondering, like, are there gonna be training sessions or practices, and like how will they work?
Yes. So we have training sessions specifically for novices. Those are going to be next week. I think Sajneet posted the Facebook event page for novice training. They're going to be on Monday and Thursday of next week at 6 p.m. We're going to be dividing people into groups based on their previous experience. So people that did a lot of debate in high school will be in a different group from people that did no debate whatsoever. We're going to be, based on the groups, giving like a seminar about like how debate works, or for people that already have some experience, maybe some strategy or like differences between high school and university debate. And then we're going to be doing practice rounds. And so those are like 2 sessions just for novices, so people that haven't are just joining the club this year. And we have events throughout the year specifically designed for training novices as well. And then every Thursday, like generally, we have practices with a seminar and a practice round, which is also generally going to be dividing people based on like what experience level they want to debate against. You're going to be getting feedback from a judge that has more experience than you, perhaps, that will give you feedback for like how to improve. And also, like if someone joins like mid-year, we also sometimes will have like breakaway groups to like teach like brand new people, because usually we'll have people come in like halfway through the year that decide to join that don't know anything, and those people also have like opportunities to learn about the activity. In terms of the platform, I think we're likely going to be using Discord for practices, just because it might be somewhat easier to manage all the like breakout rooms and stuff you need to do preparation. But yeah, we're gonna have some sort of video conferencing. In terms of timing, because I know there are people in different time zones, we might like change that up. Does that answer any like overview questions about training?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm running the training as chair of debates. So if you have questions about training in general, or you want a certain type of training, then like feel free to reach out to me and we can organize different things. So we're planning a variety of things, so not just practice rounds, but also like drills to teach specific skills, and like fun debate games that will also like go over skills that we want people to learn. But yeah, let me know if you have any like suggestions or questions about that in the future. This goes for everyone, obviously. I'm accessible on Facebook Messenger, so you could add me.
I'm also just going to quickly share like some info, and see we do have like a lot of time while we're waiting for judges. So I'm just going to share my screen, but also like put stuff into the chat for you to like actually access those links. I hope everyone can see this, because I have 2 monitors at this point. It's very confusing for me. Okay, so this is the info. Let me share some links with y'all. Basically, like, make sure you join the Facebook group. This is the main Facebook group for the novices. We have another like Facebook group, as you can see. Follow our Instagram, like we're super active on that now as well. Other things, oops, I see my screen sharing is paused, but that doesn't really matter, I guess. And Jacob just mentioned training on September 14th and 17th. So do try to come. If you can't, we will most likely have some kind of more accessible format of training materials. So maybe it's in a Google Doc with information on what British parliamentary debate is all about, and some links to videos that you can watch on your own time. So kind of like a self-paced module. And other things, we have a Discord server, so join that if you can. If you want to be added to the listserv, you can email us at our email. We're also going to post a sign-up form of sorts in the group once we have new people join in. And just a note on like external groups, CUSID is the Canadian University Society for Intercollegiate Debate. You can join their group in case you want like updates on CUSID events or general like happenings in CUSID. It's pretty lively in terms of the group, and there's always something going on. You can also like reach out to people in like the CUSID group in case you have questions about things. They also have like an executive structure where we have like voluntary members from different schools around Canada, and they manage like the entire circuit. So you can like feel free to like reach out to them. They're also like very accessible people. And another note on like meme pages, once you get into debate, it's very addictive to kind of like join meme pages. One of the I can recommend is like shitposting. If you're someone who's coming from like a different debating background as well, sometimes like debaters from other circuits like take over the page, and they kind of like post memes in that vein. So feel free to like have fun with debate, because that's really what it's all about. It's just like a chill time, and it's a great way to like kind of meet people as well. And the last thing is like the Central Novice bid or application form. This is for our exclusively novice tournament that McGill is hosting on 21st to 23rd. And in case you want to debate, you can sign up through this form. There might be like a subsidized fee for members that will make clear once we get more information from the Student Society, which is SMU, as we call it lovingly. But feel free to sign up, and its application is going to be open till the 21st. Yes, the 21st. Did I say the dates wrong? Yes, I did. 25 to 27 is when Central Novice is happening. Yeah, Jacob.
By the way, Maya is back, so we
awesome.
can do the
Perfect.
RFD.
Sweet, and all the links are in the chat.
Yeah. So the way debates generally like conclude after everyone's done and the judges made their decision, they come back and they give an explanation of who won, why that team won, and they give like feedback for teams. So Maya, who's the chair, is going to give their like reason for decision, which we sometimes abbreviate to RFD. Sorry if I used that without explaining what it meant. Yeah, so take it away, Maya.
Okay, thanks. Hi everybody. I will keep it relatively brief because I know that your discussion or whatever went on for a long time. How I usually do my RFDs is I will get the call, which is like which team won, and then I'll give, the RFD. So ultimately, myself and the panel, Jacob already explained it. Myself and the panel decided to give the round to government on like a unanimous decision for a couple of reasons. So I think some like thoughts that we had on the round in general, where we felt like both teams were not very comparative, and to a degree were also rather stubborn about keeping their own views on the round without kind of engaging with or clashing with things that were being said by the other teams on like very critical framings. I think like the best example of this in the context of the round is like you've side government talking about their definitions of like free will versus determinism, and side opposition talking about their conceptions of free will and determinism, and they never really explain why one versus the other necessarily makes a lot more sense. So why then do we still think that side government wins? A couple of reasons. We think that in spite of the fact that there was limited clash from both sides, there was still enough material from side government to have them win this debate on like the several main clashes, which it's like talking about like how people feel about their own decision making, how they feel that they make, and then second, like greater societal structures, so things like advocacy and prison. Let's talk about it. So I think we all agree that government won on like in terms of like individuals' perception of their decisions in a couple of ways, because we think that government proves that like at the very least, people are not going to be able to feel good about things that they their life if they subscribe to determinism, because they won't feel like they've earned it or deserved it in any way, and that will remove / limit their ability to enjoy it. Secondarily, will also limit their motivation and capabilities to try to put themselves in better situations. And they also tell us that was out of your control. Opposition's takes on this is that you won't blame yourself for bad things. This is already a thing that exists on side government, so that is a like neutral point. And they also tell us that you'll get the material benefits regardless, but this doesn't engage properly with government's point on how you won't enjoy those things because you don't feel like you've earned them. So at the end of the day, government like wins on the clash because they demonstrate why, even if you have everything opposition says, you still won't feel as good as you would under a world where you believe in free will, and are able to, in the context where you have free will on the comparative, able to enjoy the good things you have and still reasonably rationalize out why the bad things or bad choices you make or bad opportunities, whatever, don't like affect you as much. In terms of advocacy and like structural change, I think this is something Reese said in our deliberation that I'm just going to quote, because I think it like clearly outlines the problem with opposition on this front and why they lost on this clash, is basically the opposition has no mechanism as to why people will think the determined world that they live in is unjust, and therefore will have
no mechanization for motivation as to why they're likely to change that world, right? I think this exists in contrast with what we get from state government, who tells us clearly in the PM and also in the DPM that basically once people have like good things and they think they live in a determined world that said you should have this, they'll try to keep that and therefore keep inequitable systems and structures of power. Secondarily, they also they'll have like a greater motivation to advocate for societal change and try to engage with things more favorably in that regard, like agitate for change in a way that is more likely to be feasible and more able to feel justified. In the specific context of like prison reform, which oddly in both teams seem to exist as a separate constructive point, when in reality is just an example of the greater structural changes they're talking about, and I do not think it is actually a separate constructive point. That's a side note though. I think that this looks like in that clash specifically playing out like opposition demonstrating why people are more likely to be lenient in reform as opposed to an opposition's world where even though opposition tries to talk about like this lens of like retribution and also how like predeterminism factors will make you be more empathetic, they don't actually explain why that is likely to be the case, unlike state government, which is why government wins. I hope that made sense to everybody listening to me talk right now. Panelists, you're welcome to weigh in. I'm also curious as to what the floor vote was. Yeah. Or if people have questions for me or the panel, again, panelists, feel free to talk.
The floor vote was like towards government by 3 votes. It was very close.
Reese, Stanley, anything to add?
If we want extra comments, I can add extra comments, which is just the notion that I think something that generally fell short on both teams was establishing the paradigms under which people make decisions on like either side of the house, because the whole motion is about like a world in which the general consensus of thought about like how human decision making works is distinct, and then there is just a broad application that like what people's perception of justice is just status quo perception of justice without any analysis as to why a perception of justice or a perception of what we ought try and achieve would look like the way it would, say, in the application that Op gave us, that like you need to be morally culpable for actions if, and that justifies sort of like moral retribution, without analysis as to why, like in a world with determinism, that type of logic would continue to exist. And I think there was just like a lot of depth that was lost and a lot of inability to be actively comparative when there wasn't that sort of additional line of analysis establishing why like moral frameworks would be consistent with status quo if the general consensus of like moral views of human action were different.
Yeah, I don't really have that much to add. I think like Maya covered most of the stuff that we talked about during the deliberation, but I think Reese is largely correct about like need engagement, not just in the way about like this intuitively makes sense like rationally, but also in the way that people are more likely to engage with these narrative when they believe in determinism, such as they are probably like, because I think it is possible to opt to prove that in a world in which people believe that everything's predetermined, they're gonna strive for more equality or that having more empathy. But I think we largely agree that mechanism is lacking to the extent that like for long history, I mean just like for a long period in history, like there are unjust social structure even when people believe that some things are predetermined, such as like people who are just better because they were born into the better race or they just like born into the higher social hierarchy, and people believe that's a perfectly acceptable norm, right? So I think there are just the mechanism that often to prove that, but like why are other additional social factor why people would likely engage with this narrative differently. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I just have a quick question, like either for the judges or for anyone who can answer it really. Were there any other like case lines or arguments that you think the op team could have ran that would have been better, like other than just mechanism lacking within their arguments?
I guess we can, do the like panelists have anything to say about that? I assume you guys discussed this at some degree of length. No? Anyone? Here, I'll check the participants list if anyone is raising their hand.
I think Fawn has some takes. Should you say that in the chat?
Oh, nice. Sorry, I didn't notice. Yeah, Fawn, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I think something that would have helped the op case a lot, and I don't know if this is necessarily a case line that could have run, but at least like frame out a little bit more why free will is equally used or weaponized to justify the existing inequalities in the status quo, and how just as much as you can use determinism to say, oh yeah, I just have more money than you because it was predetermined that way, sorry, you can say that free will is equally manipulated by people at the top to say, well, you know, like on the basis of meritocracy, and how that is the more likely scenario in a world where there is radical free will, but there isn't an actual material change in how inequality is distributed. I think if that was like mexed out, it could have more directly clashed with the op case about like, you know, how inequality would lessen and how we get a better social justice system, and also make the debate a little bit clearer.
Nice. Ruth also told me she had thoughts. Ruth, you want to explain your takes?
Oh, okay. Well, I think that there's like a few things you can explain under the types of policy change you get with determinism, which is that if you like remove the idea of choice and you only imagine that giving the correct inputs to people will lead to the correct like output in their decision making, like kind of like how you train like, I don't know, like robots or like how AI works, then it probably means that the policy that you end up making will be more effective because it's not reliant on the choices that people will end up making, but it's only reliant on the types of inputs that you give them. So I think that's like something having to do with like the policy issues. I also think just like generally speaking, there's some more arguments having to do with treatment towards people or empathy. So like people of different identities, if they're like predetermined to be that way, as opposed to like being able to advocate in a world with free choice that they chose to be that way, means that you like, and they could just be like, well, I was determined to be this way, and you can be more empathetic towards them. And there's probably like, you like even, there's like more material on that, but those are just like some general thoughts.
Can I add something on that? Because I did think about running that argument.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so like definitely I think part of this, can you guys be quiet? Part of this debate was like trying to, like prepping for this debate was trying to figure out like what is a reasonable conception of each thing. And we did have a discussion in advance so that we weren't like totally out of whack with each other, and to make for a better debate for you guys. And I think we probably still like have just different like individual perspectives on like what each thing would look like. But the reason I didn't run the argument of like, for example, you'll like understand like LGBTQ people as having like been born the way that they were, is because I think that that probably is on the margin of things that are less affected by this motion. Like I think like people's perspectives on like sexual identity, gender identity is probably something that's more like fundamental bigotry stuff than like based on whether they think that you can choose it or not. So like, yeah, there might be a margin that changes, but in terms of prioritizing what I thought would be the biggest margin that is likely to change, I kind of erred on the side of not analyzing that. I do think there's a way to prove it though. I just was like, it might be harder.
Yeah, I also just want to say that like I actually taken a lot of classes in philosophy about like regarding free will debates, and there are actually quite extensive literature on that. And they're actually hilarious when you look at people back in the 16th century writing about free will and trying to justify like social structure when they had this entire debate how like free will, about how the free will of gods influence like physics. It was like, I don't know, just interesting take, you know, check out philosophy, 17th century philosophy, take that class if you're interested in free will, the history of free will debate and stuff like that. Yeah. Also, I think it's like, there are also just like a lot of like contemporary philosophy literature, probably not relevant to the debate, but it's very interesting about like whether or not there are things that like we all know logically are true, but whether or not it's possible to live with this notion. Because I think it's like, say that even if you want to fiat that people do believe in determinism, it's very unlikely that they'll see themselves daily as an unable to make choices, which I think is the thing that Naomi pointed out. Also, the things that like Nick told me about like information gap and stuff like that, right? But I think it could probably be more substantiated, more in this debate regarding how that actually influence people's, like how people are going to react to this belief that they're predetermined.
Oh, by the way, Ruth wanted me to mention something to everyone, which is that not all debate topics are like this philosophical in nature. We debate tons of different topics. So some of it is like pop culture, like, I don't know, whether or not, like I had to debate a motion about whether or not rap groups are better than like individual artists, or it could be about like economics or social justice or sports or any number of things. You know, like whether or not there are motions about whether or not like the NBA should have teams composed based on like collective height of all of the people added together as opposed to number of people or something like that. I don't know, all sorts of weird stuff. So yeah, don't be like, if you don't like philosophy, there are other debate topics that might interest you. I just wanted to point that out. Not that you shouldn't like philosophy. Philosophy is great. Nice. Are there any other questions? Oh, I see something in the chat. Brilliant. All right. Well, that more or less concludes our opening of the House debate. Congratulations to Team Government for winning unanimously. We'll stick around for like a little bit more, just in case anyone has like questions that they like just thought of or wanted to ask one-on-one or anything like that. But yeah, that's pretty much everything for tonight. Hope to see you, all of you guys, at Novice Training.
Thanks for joining, folks, and special shout out to our debaters and people who recognized by background. Also join the Facebook groups. Make sure you do that, and add like the exec members or like other folks that you've seen or met today on Facebook. We can like add you to groups and also like great people to chat to. So feel free to like reach out to folks.